Noswaith dda, good evening. Thanks for joining us. My name's Owen Evans, His Majesty's Chief Inspector. I'm still getting used to that. So I'd like to welcome you to our session this evening, where we're going to talk about the annual report, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, but we're also predominantly going to talk about how Estyn's framework has changed. Many of you in the sectors will have already come across the fact that there have been some quite significant changes in the way that we're inspecting, not just in the framework itself, but in the way we're going about our business. So tonight we're going to hear from Steve Pringle, who's our lead on inspection policy, but we'll have an opportunity then to take questions from you about how things are changing, any things that you're concerned about, and we've got a panel of people from Estyn here to answer your questions. Please ask questions in Welsh or English as you feel fit, and we'll endeavour to answer. And if we do need to come back to anything, we will come back at the end of the session. So without further ado, I hope you take some interesting facts away from tonight. I hope you engage with us. We're always looking for feedback from the inspection process, but I'm going to hand over to Steve now, who's going to take us through exactly how it's changed and give his experience really of how this is being felt out in schools and across the sectors in Wales. So Steve, over to you.
Diolch, Owen, and noswaith dda, everyone. Thank you for coming to our presentation this evening. As Owen says, I'm going to talk a bit about our inspection process, what to expect, I should say, sorry, if you are being inspected. I'm going to talk about what's changed in our new arrangements, but also what stayed the same and why we've made those changes. I'm going to talk about the Estyn mindset and what that means in practice. And I'm going to start off by talking about our two new documents that we have that you may have seen on our website, what we inspect and how we inspect. And the purpose of those, I hope, is fairly clear by their name. These replace the guidance handbooks that we used to have for each sector. We created those two documents mainly in light of stakeholder feedback. Because they thought, particularly our head teacher reference group thought that would make things a great deal clearer. And they're written in a way that we hope provides a bit of clarity and accessibility for people. They're now a mixture of prose and bullet points, and hopefully it makes clear exactly what to expect when you have your inspection. First of all, I'm going to talk about the inspection mindset. Now, the inspection mindset is crucial to how we carry out our work. It's on the, we'll see a slide on that shortly, there we go. It's really important to us that these principles underpin all the work that we do when we're out in schools and PRUs. Being fair and impartial, obviously, we're an independent organisation and we strive always to be objective and balanced in everything that we do, but also be supportive as well. Developing a strong professional relationship with providers is really, really important. And also, we aim to encourage innovation and creativity. We aim to support providers through times of great change in order to allow them to innovate and experiment and try new things out, and to take a pragmatic approach when providers do that. We aim to be reflective. As I've already mentioned, stakeholder feedback is very, very important to us, and we seek this in a range of formal and informal contexts. And we also internally, we reflect on our practices all of the time, and we tweak approaches in light of what we experience, what we hear from providers, what we hear from our other partners in education, and we communicate those as best we can through things like inspector updates and the website and so on. Being transparent is also extremely important to us, and we always aim to communicate directly, succinctly, and clearly. And a provider at the end of an inspection should always be really clear about why their school or PRU has received the judgments that it has. Moving on to talk about our inspection framework, which we'll see shortly on the next slide. Considering the context of a provider has always been extremely important to us, and we've done that in the past by looking, for example, at the proportion of pupils eligible for free school meals, those with additional learning needs, and those with English as an additional language. So setting out that context has been really important. This obviously has become particularly crucial since the pandemic. We maintained contact with providers during the pandemic, for example, through our pastoral HMI role and through engagement calls. And in particular, this helped us to understand the biggest issues facing schools and communicate that to Welsh Government. On inspection, we strive to take full account of the impact that COVID has had on staff and pupils, and we fully recognise the tremendous pressure that the pandemic has put on school and Prue communities, and the impact that this has had on the well-being of both staff and of pupils, and the progress that pupils make. We do this in a number of ways. The reporting inspector, the person that's leading the inspection, will discuss the school's context in their initial telephone call with the head teacher. And also on the first day of the inspection, the head teacher gets an opportunity to explain the school's context, particularly with regard to their experience during COVID. And we've extended the time substantially available to the head teacher to do that at the start of the inspection. Obviously, our continued use of peer inspectors and secondees working for Estyn has been really important with this, because it gives us an up-to-date picture of the sorts of stresses and pressures that providers have been under during the pandemic. To give a practical example, our approach to attendance has been that we no longer have been analysing attendance rates or comparing them to previous attendance rates, because obviously that would be unrealistic. What we've done instead, in the case of attendance, is looked at the school's provision for monitoring and improving attendance as part of Inspection Area 4 on care support and guidance. Although I'm mainly talking about core inspections, this approach has had a particular impact on our work with providers who are in a follow-up category, those who are in special measures, for example. And we no longer make direct comparisons when visiting those schools with the core inspection, because again, as I say, that would be unrealistic. And actually, as a result of looking at a broader picture of those schools' work, we've actually removed a much larger proportion recently of those schools who are in those statutory categories. Moving on then to the actual inspection framework itself, the 5 inspection areas. You will probably have noticed that these are actually by and large the same as they were in the previous iteration of the inspection cycle. And we'll see those on the next slide shortly. The 5 inspection areas, as I say, are largely the same. The main change is inspection area 1, which we have renamed as learning rather than standards. And that was to emphasize that we had already been moving away from considering standards as just data, for example, key stage 4 outcomes. The team on an inspection are much more focused on the learning and progress that pupils make who are actually in the school at the time, the progress they make in their knowledge and understandings and skills in their lessons. The reason that we kept things broadly the same was, again, feedback from stakeholders who felt that by and large, the framework that we began in 2017 was working pretty well. So in many ways, this was an evolution rather than a revolution. There are a few sort of tweaks within that inspection framework. For example, in leadership and management, 5.4, which was resource management, is now part of 5.1. But by and large, it remains the same. One change, though, that is a crucial part of our work, which we'll see on the next slide, is our approach to safeguarding. Now, child protection obviously remains hugely important, of paramount importance to all inspectors, but we are broadening our approach to safeguarding and trying to look at safeguarding culture. So rather than just focusing on the policies and procedures that are part of child protection, we're aiming to look at the broader picture of how providers manage to forge this culture of safeguarding across the school or Prue. And that takes in, for example, approaches to bullying, to behaviour, and also attendance, and also how proactive a provider is rather than being reactive to issues around those areas. On inspection, the nominee will see this approach in action during team meetings, where the team will discuss this safeguarding culture regularly as part of their team meetings alongside learning and teaching. And also inspectors will ask a variety of staff how they, just through their ordinary day-to-day role, contribute to keeping pupils safe and happy during their learning. Probably one of the biggest shifts in our approach has been abandoning summative judgments. We no longer grade, so to speak, each aspect of the inspection framework as good or adequate, etc. Again, this was in response to stakeholder feedback. Around 80% of our stakeholders felt that this would be a positive move. The reasoning behind it is that schools and PRUs are complex institutions, and it was felt that it was a bit sort of reductive and overly simplistic to reduce all of the work that providers do and boil it down to one single judgment. And this has freed us up to perhaps take a rather more nuanced approach to identify the specific strengths and areas for improvement within a provider, and allowed us to write more freely about them. Those of you who are interested may wish to know that we have a new writing guide, which is also on our website, that frees up inspectors to try and capture providers in a much more individual way than perhaps has been the case in the past. Now, it mentions on the slide there the Monday afternoon professional dialogue, and that's the start of the inspection week, which I'm going to talk you through as concisely as I can now. The start of the inspection, as I mentioned before, begins with the head teacher having the opportunity to tell the team about the school's context in relation to COVID and anything else that the head teacher feels is appropriate. That will be followed up by a series of professional dialogue meetings. Now, these are not like the other meetings that take place during inspection. These meetings are about understanding the provider. They're about understanding what their improvement priorities are, how they arrived at those, and what specific actions they think are important to their school or PRU at the time. And these meetings are as much about understanding the context and building a relationship with the provider as they are about acquiring evidence. Other activities on the first day of the inspection will remain pretty much the same, such as the parents' meeting, the meeting of the governors, and an opportunity for staff to meet the inspection team. As for the rest of the week, the actual scale of that will depend on which sector you're in. For example, secondary inspections are longer than primary inspections. But after that, the main activities that inspectors undertake, such as lesson observations, learning walks, meetings with staff and with pupils, something I'll talk about a little bit more shortly, will be broadly the same. The role of the nominee is also the same. They play a crucial part in the inspection process, and they provide the link between the provider and the inspection team. I mentioned lesson observations there, and it's briefly worth reiterating something that we say very frequently is that Estyn has no preferred approaches to teaching. All inspectors are interested in when they go into a lesson or a session is whether learners are making progress and whether they are engaged in their learning. There are no specific things that an inspector expects to see. At the end of the inspection activities, inspectors will spend some time discussing the main strengths and areas for improvement. They'll decide on the level of follow-up, if any is required, and they'll draft recommendations and consider what will go in the school's overview, which again I'll talk about shortly. The draft report will also be drawn up towards the end of the inspection, and the nominee will have an opportunity to contribute to that, to ensure that the messages that the team come up with are clear and appropriate and will be well understood by all the staff and the school's community. And then, of course, at the end of the week, there will be a feedback meeting where the draft report will be shared with the school, as well as the local authority or region and the chair of governors. Moving on. A few things that are slightly different in our approach since we adopted our new framework. Obviously, listening to learners remains a crucial part of our inspection evidence, and inspectors will take every opportunity that they can to speak to learners. We are taking some new approaches in some sectors, for example, by inviting pupils to bring a friend with them to meetings, and also undertaking some new types of activities. One big difference that I know that providers who had some of our pilot inspections earlier this year noticed was inspectors are striving to be out and about, so to speak, much more, getting out at lunch times and break times, talking to pupils in informal context and getting their feelings about the school. And obviously we still have the role of the lay inspector, whose role is to sort of take the temperature of the school, if you like, to talk to as many pupils as possible and to understand their feelings about their school life. One thing that has changed quite substantially are our questionnaires, and you can see those on our website. We've broadened the range of questions that we ask, and we've also broadened the range of possible responses rather than just having strongly agree or disagree and so on. We've removed don't know from them because we found that response wasn't proving to be terribly helpful on occasions. We've also given pupils and parents and other stakeholders the opportunity to comment on specific issues such as bullying. And as I say, if you want to have a look at the questionnaires, they're on the website. The overview replaces the summary that we used to have at the beginning of the inspection report. And that's crucial now, particularly that we no longer have the summary evaluations, the 5 grades, if you like. It's very important now that we work hard to ensure that that captures the work of that individual provider and tells their story clearly and with clarity. A new innovation that we are going to be starting quite shortly is a parents report. Feedback from some of our stakeholders who are parents was that they would miss having the 5 overall judgments. And so what we're doing to address that is from the end of November, reports will, when they're published, have a parents report summary that's aimed particularly at that group of our stakeholders. So that sort of concludes that whistle-stop tour of our inspection arrangements, what's changed, what stayed the same, hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavour of what to inspect should your provider be inspected. We're going to hand over now to any questions. We have already had some questions in advance. The first one came in from Jane Borthwick from Flintshire County Council, and she asked a question about how teams specifically go about taking account of the challenges and impact of COVID. And you can see the question on the screen there. And I'm going to hand over to Kath Evans, our Assistant Director in charge of school inspection, for that question. Kath.
Diolch yn fawr, Steve. I think you touched a little bit upon this in the presentation, but we continue to take the pandemic into account in all aspects of our work, not just inspection. During spring 2022, when we resumed inspection, we did it slowly and sensitively, working with the providers as part of our pilot inspection approach, and that gave us an opportunity to get lots of feedback from staff and head teachers to inform the rollout this term. As Steve mentioned, the starting point for all our inspections is that conversation and discussion with the head teacher and senior leaders on a Monday afternoon. That gives us an opportunity, gives the team an opportunity to really understand the context of the school or PRU, to understand the challenges during COVID, but also these ongoing challenges brought about by the pandemic. We also understand that those providers who serve our most disadvantaged communities really face even greater challenges. So it's really important that during inspection, there's an opportunity to revisit these conversations. We've spent a lot of time developing our current framework with our head teacher reference group and with leaders and teachers who were part of our pilot inspections last year. And we hope that our framework is designed to be robust, but also fair and supportive. Thanks very much, Steve.
Diolch, Kath. Thank you for that answer. Another question that we have had sent in was about what are inspectors looking for when they visit individual lessons? Well, again, I have touched on this already, but it's worth repeating because this is an important thing to address, and it's one of those myths that we sometimes hear around inspection. I would stress again that when inspectors visit a lesson, the only thing that they're looking for is, are pupils engaged in their learning and are they making progress? There are lots and lots of different ways that can be achieved, lots of different teaching methodologies, and there's no one or set of those that Estyn thinks is more effective than others. So it's really important that people don't think, no teachers or other staff think that there's a particular thing that we expect to see. It is all just about pupils' engagement and learning. Moving on, I don't think there's any further questions in the chat at the moment. Another question that we had sent in advance was, how can teaching staff best prepare for an inspection? And I'm going to hand over to another one of our assistant directors, Liz Miles, for that one. Liz?
Thanks, Steve. It's just really simple. Teachers don't need to prepare for an Estyn inspection. They just need to do what they do on a day-to-day regular basis. And I just recently had this conversation with my son, because he's a teacher in his school, has been notified, and he said, "Oh, Mum, would you want to see a lesson where we'd been building up or a start?" And I said, "I don't mind. Whatever's best for your pupils, whatever's best for you, you know that what you do on a day-to-day basis is what's right for your children in your class." So I think that's the clear message we can give. Don't do anything different for inspection. Do what you'd normally do. We don't need to see lesson plans. Don't go over and above about it. Do your normal day job.
Okay, thank you for that, Liz. I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat, so I'll go to the last one that we've had sent in, which was, can you tell me more about the nominee role and what it involves? How do you feel it can positively support an inspection? Well, the nominee role is something that Estyn has had for a while now, and it's something that we think is really, really important to our work. And when I was talking about mindsets before, I mentioned transparency, and that's the nominee role is a key part of that, because nothing will take place in any team meetings or discussions around any judgments or identification of strengths or areas for improvement that the nominee does not witness. It's really important that is the case, because, as I say, even if a provider doesn't necessarily 100% agree with all of the messages that they hear, and it is the role sometimes of an Estyn team to deliver difficult messages, they should be clear about how and why the team arrived at those decisions. The nominee is really crucial for the team as well. The nominee is sort of the conduit of information. They provide all the information and evidence that the team need during the inspection process, and as I say, they are there as well for the editing of the draft report, so that they have some input into both the content of the report and also the recommendations that we leave the school or PRU with. We have got a question in the chat. So you spoke about the way that the context of the school and their experience during COVID is taken into consideration in terms of attendance. Will this also be the case in terms of progress? Thank you for that question, Simon. Yes, very much indeed. I mentioned schools in follow-up as an example earlier on. So, for example, those schools that are in special measures. Prior to the pandemic, the job of a team was in some ways easy. You would look at the core inspection report and consider the standards that pupils were achieving at that time, and then you'd see whether they had improved on the monitoring visit. It would be unrealistic to do that now. We recognise that pupils across lots of different providers have suffered regress in many of their skills due to the effects of the pandemic, and we are realistic about the way in which perhaps things in terms of skills and standards are not as they perhaps would have been 2 or 3 years ago. And that's something that the team will take into account. They will also discuss with the provider at some length about how they go about identifying those weaknesses in pupil skills or knowledge or understanding, and what they have in place to address any of those issues. And that's certainly true of literacy and numeracy, which you mentioned there, Simon. So thanks very much for your question. If we don't have any further questions, I can't see any in the chat at the moment, then I think it's probably time for me to hand back to Owen.
Diolch yn fawr, Steve. Thanks very much, and thank you for your questions this evening. As ever, if you have any more questions, please do contact us through our social media, through Twitter or Facebook, and we will get back to you. I mentioned at the start that I wanted to talk a little about the annual report as well. The annual report, is a fairly weighty tome, and we normally publish it in January, but we felt this year that we try and do things a bit differently. So we published 2 weeks ago a short summary document that really has been tailored to be more accessible for you. So what you'll see in it is it's information by sector with a little table really of what we're seeing that's working well in the sectors, but also the areas that we're seeing, areas that we need to improve on collectively. So I would ask you, if you have a chance, please do go to our web pages and have a look at the annual report summary document. We'll still be publishing the major document in January, but I think it's a useful tool for you just to see where the system is. There's also a section in there on the curriculum, and of course we will be looking at the equity within that as well. The other thing on the web pages is please have a look, because we have the proof is in the pudding, to what Steve has been saying. We've been asking professionals across Wales really about how they've found the whole process of going through the inspection. So we have a number of heads now who've given their views about how things are working. Now, we took a lot of feedback, as Steve said, in coming up with the pilot framework that we're now rolling out, but we're always looking for feedback and always trying to make sure that it works, because the feeling you should get is that we're working with you on this, and that the approach that we're taking to inspections has really changed. So if there's no more, and there's no more questions, can I thank Steve for speaking this evening? Can I thank the panel for answering questions? Can I thank you for joining us? Oh, we have one more question. I can just read. With the introduction of progression steps and given the pandemic, what data will inspectors expect to see? From Rebecca. So, Liz.
Thanks, Owen. Rebecca, we don't expect to see any data that the school produces for Estyn. We don't expect to see any test results. What we would like to know and talk through with the school is how well the school is using their own intelligence, be that from formative or summative assessments, how well they're using that information to inform the next steps in learning. So we won't be judging and looking at percentages of children above, below, progression steps, any of that. But what we do want to talk to schools is about the data that they collect, and most importantly, how that is used to ensure that all children make the best progress that they're capable
of. Thanks, Liz. And perhaps I'll finish with a message that the whole process has been designed that we can work with you. We've all got school improvement in our hearts. We're all here for the learners. And I think with the removal of summative judgments, we have a wonderful opportunity to work alongside each other, which is why we're saying don't prepare. It's better that we see exactly how things are going on, so we can give you an honest opinion, because I sincerely believe that Estyn has got the widest breadth of educational experience of any organisation in Wales at the moment, simply because of what we do. So we'll work with our partners, but please don't fear us coming in when you get the notification. I know it can occasionally feel like a heart-stopping moment, but we're here to help. But we were there also to make sure that the learner's voice is heard and that we're setting standards, which we'll continue to do. But I think you'll see that the approach has changed. So without further ado, can I thank you for joining us this evening? As I said, any more questions, please do visit our webpage, do visit our Twitter account or Facebook. If you do want to catch up on the video, it will be on the webpage afterwards, so you can access it there if you're having trouble viewing through the school, Becca. And I'd just like to hope that you pick up on our webinars in future. We'll be looking into various sectors over the coming months, really, and explaining where we're seeing things that are really working and areas we think collectively we need to improve. So hopefully that'll be of interest. So, diolch am fawr i chi gyd, diolch am ymuno heno, and have a great evening. Nos wetha.